Want to know the episode I loved the most in season 3? Stay tuned to find out. Hello. Welcome back to my channel, everyone. This is Asha Media TV. For those of you that are new here, welcome. I like to watch, react, and review a variety of stuff related to sci-fi, fantasy, and comic books. So in today's video, I am going to rank the episodes of the 3rd season of Supernatural. But before I get to rolling with that, I do need to cover a couple of basic stuff, so please listen up, don't skip ahead. The first thing you should know, just in case you missed it in the title, this is a video full of spoilers related to Supernatural Season 3. You've been warned. Spoilers ahead, spoilers ahead, spoilers ahead. And lastly, just in case this is your first time watching one of my episode ranking videos, I just want to let you know right away, somewhat of a quasi-disclaimer, that this is not meant to be some kind of in-depth analysis or full recap of every episode of the 3rd season. All it is my subjective opinions about certain moments in an episode that I find noteworthy and one particular sequence of scenes that is the most memorable for me. And then I use all of that to rank the episodes from, least to best for my viewing pleasure. All right, so don't take it to heart. I'm not trying to put down or overrate an episode versus another. I know all of you have your favorites, and so I'm just using this type of video format to share or give you an idea of what my favorites are in a particular order. So with all that being said, let's now get the ball rolling, starting with my pick at number 16. Episode 13, Ghostfacers. In this episode, the Winchesters are reluctantly forced to assist the Ghostfacers team in destroying a homicidal spirit. But despite the corny but very catchy Ghostfacers theme song, or the visual paranormal activities of what Sam describes as death echoes, or even the awful death of sweet Corbett. Despite all that, the most memorable part in this episode was when Ed bravely expressed his love and appreciation for Corbett, causing Corbett's spirit to attack the baddie and end the supernatural occurrences in the Morton house happening every leap year. To say these scenes were pleasant is an understatement. In fact, they were darn right surprisingly heartwarming. At number 15, Episode 14, Long Distance Call. In this episode, the Winchesters look into strange suicides being caused by a Krakoda. But despite Stewie, the busty Asian beauty's admirer, getting his soul sucked out by the Krakoda, or Sam saving Lainey's little brother at the last minute from a fatal accident, or even Dean almost killing an innocent man who thought he had killed his daughter. Despite all that, the most memorable part in this episode was when Dean gets a phone call, and on the other end was the voice of his dad, John Winchester, telling him that he knows where to find the demon who holds his contract. To say these scenes were thrilling is an understatement. In fact, they were darn right hair-raisingly eerie. At number 14, Episode 5, Bedtime Stories. In this episode, the Winchesters try to stop an angry spirit from hurting people with live-action characters inspired by grim fairy tales. But despite the cool opening scene with the Three Little Pigs-like scenario, or finding out the angry spirit is actually Dr. Garrison's comatose daughter, or even Sam abruptly killing a crossroad demon in cold blood. Despite all that, the most memorable part in this episode was during the Hansel and Gretel-like situation where the witch-like old lady starts stabbing away at Ken. To say these scenes were shocking is an understatement. In fact, they were darn right jaw-droppingly frightening. At number 13, Episode 2, The Kids Are All Right. In this episode, the Winchesters investigate strange deaths caused by changelings. But despite Dean suspecting he may have fathered a child named Ben, or Sam finding out that everyone who knew his mother have all mysteriously died, or even Ruby revealing herself to Sam as being a demon. Despite all of that, the most memorable part in this episode was when Kathleen was convinced her daughter Katie was a monster and tried to drown her by means of sinking her car in a nearby lake. To say these scenes were tragic is an understatement. In fact, they were darn right horrifically upsetting. At number 12, Episode 15, Time is on My Side. In this episode, the Winchesters try to stop the immortal Doc Benton from killing innocent people for their body parts. But despite Doc Benton pulling a beating heart out of the chest of a young man, or Bella trying to kill a fake sleeping Sam and Dean in their beds, or even Sam almost getting his eyeball scooped out of his head. Despite all of that, the most memorable part in this episode was when we're shown a flashback of a young Bella making a deal with a demon to kill her parents who abused her in exchange for 10 years of freedom. To say these scenes were gripping is an understatement. In fact, they were darn right dramatically riveting. At number 11, Episode 4, Sin City. In this episode, the Winchesters investigate a string of mysterious suicides and are confronted with two star-crossed loving demons. But despite the introduction of one of Dean's hunter acquaintances, Richie, or Dean trapped in a basement with Demon Casey, or even Casey revealing her faith in the divine and infamous fallen angel, Lucifer. Despite all of that, the most memorable part in this episode was when Sam sought out Father Gill's help and he turns out to be possessed by a demon. And not just any demon, the long-term partner of the demon possessing Casey's body. To say these scenes were surprising is an understatement. In fact, they were darn right awesomely intriguing. At number 10, Episode 6, Red Sky at Morning. In this episode, the Winchesters reluctantly team up with Bella Talbot to stop the murderous actions of a vengeful spirit. But despite the hilarious return of sneaky lying Bella, or Sam barely tolerating the awkward and inappropriate advances from Gertrude, or even Bella unbelievably managing to steal the hand of glory from Dean's coat pocket without him noticing. Despite all that, the most memorable part in this episode was when Sam successfully summoned the captain who ordered the death of the angry spirit, who also happened to be his brother. And so, as a result, their altercation saved Bella's life. To say these scenes were interesting is an understatement. In fact, they were darn right visually cool. At number 9, Episode 10, Dream a Little Dream of Me. In this episode, the Winchesters struggle to overcome the manipulative tactics of a human dreamwalker named Jeremy. But despite Sam's lust-filled dream of Bella Talbot, or Dean confronting himself in his own complicated mind, or even the boys discovering the colt was stolen by Bella. Despite all that, the most memorable part in this episode was when the entity chasing Bobby turned out to be the spirit of his dead wife. We find out Bobby's wife was possessed, and he had to kill her because he didn't know at the time what he was dealing with. To say these scenes were startling is an understatement. In fact, they were darn right terrifyingly captivating. At number 8, Episode 9, Malleus Maleficarum. In this episode, the Winchesters get help from Ruby to take on a coven of witches. But despite the horrifying death of Janet at the beginning of the episode, or Ruby and Tammy's epic and well-choreographed fight, or even Ruby admitting that she lied to Sam about being able to save Dean from going to hell. Despite all that, the most memorable part in this episode was when Tammy described herself as being the boss demon that turned Ruby into a demon, on top of the fact that Ruby was once a human witch. To say these scenes were revealing is an understatement. In fact, they were darn right wonderfully bewitching. At number 7, Episode 11, Mystery Spot. In this episode, the Winchesters are placed in a mystery spot-like reality created by the Trickster. But despite Dean dying around 100 times in all kinds of ways, or that awesome moment at the diner where Sam mimics Dean in unison, or even that moment when Sam stabbed Bobby, whom he believed was the Trickster, and was doubtful for a split second. Despite all of that, the most memorable part in this episode was when Dean has somewhat of a final death. 6 months goes by, and we watch Sam become his own version of Taxi Driver's Travis Bickman. To say these scenes were distressing is an understatement. In fact, they were darn right frustratingly daunting. So I figured I'd take a moment here to chime in my final thoughts about episode 11, Mystery Spot, because it's a beloved episode for a large majority of SPN fans. I just feel I owe it to you to kind of justify to some degree my final thoughts until further notice about this episode. So I ended up rewatching it 2 more times after my first reaction. I took into consideration everyone's notes, and I think where I've placed it at number 7 is fair, considering that I still have my gripe about the Trickster himself being a little bit too OP based on what I'm seeing in the episode. So one of you were kind enough to not give me any spoilers or even indicate to a future episode or future season. You simply told me to hold that thought about the trickster, which I've interpreted as meaning that perhaps the trickster and aspects about this trickster will be clarified in an upcoming episode at some point in the series. So that actually makes me feel better. Whether or not it justifies my perception of the trickster being a bit OP, I don't know. But when it comes to this episode, I just want to clarify that I love everything about it up until the point Dean has that final death and 6 months goes by. And on my first watch, I thought it was like really happening in real time, affecting everybody else. That's why I was like, where's Ruby? Where is this? Where's that? But thankfully, it's been clarified that what the trickster was doing was creating somewhat of a off reality that did not affect the real world, so to speak, right? So that actually helps me appreciate the episode a bit more to bump it up my list here at number 7, which I still think is fair. So just letting you know that that's the reasoning behind the ranking. And if I change my mind at some point in the future, maybe I'll let you know. But that's where it is for now. So let's continue with my ranking, starting with my pick at number 6. Episode 8, A Very Supernatural Christmas. In this episode, the Winchesters fight against Mr. and Mrs. Pagan God. But despite a demonic Santa look-alike collecting human sacrifices in front of children, or Sam and Dean being tortured by probably the politest gods ever, or even Sam arranging a surprise Christmas celebration for Dean. Despite all that, the most memorable part in this episode was when we get a flashback of Sam and Dean as kids. A persistent and curious Sam begs Dean to tell him the truth about their dad's lifestyle. Little Sam not only finds out that Santa doesn't really exist, but that real monsters do instead. To say these scenes were sad is an understatement. In fact, they were darn right tearfully heartbreaking. At number 5, Episode 1, The Magnificent Seven. In this episode, the Winchesters, Bobby, Isaac, and Tamara are up against the 7 deadly sins in human form. But despite the envy demon influencing a woman to kill someone over a pair of green pumps, or the introduction of a fierce and mysterious woman coming to Sam's rescue, or even Dean finally telling Sam about the terms of his deal with the Crossroad Demon. Despite all of that, the most memorable part in this episode was when the Gluttony Demon makes Isaac drink drain cleaning fluid. To say these scenes were gruesome is an understatement. In fact, they were darn right terrifyingly gory. At number 4, Episode 12, Use and Bellow. In this episode, the Winchesters are stuck in a police precinct under siege by a legion of demons. But despite FBI agent Victor Henriksen being possessed by a demon, or the clever mass exorcising of demons using the tape-recorded voice of Sam's recitation, or even the dreadful death of everyone at the police station, including Nancy and Henriksen. Despite all of that, the most memorable part in this episode was the introduction of the boss demon Lilith, possessing the body of an innocent-looking little girl. To say these scenes were alarming is an understatement. In fact, they were darn right disquietingly scary. We've reached my top 3 picks. If you've been paying attention, you should know what the 3 contenders are. Huh? Have you guessed it? Let's keep going. My pick at number 3 is Episode 3, Bad Day at Black Rock. In this episode, the Winchesters go through a string of good and not so good luck while in possession of a cursed rabbit's foot. But despite that joyful moment of Sam and Dean winning free food for a year, or the introduction of thieving Bella Talbot, or even Sam losing his shoe in one of the funniest and cutest Sam moments ever. Despite all of that, the most memorable part in this episode was when Wayne the thug becomes cursed with bad luck and dies by slipping and falling onto a fork, piercing right through his throat. To say these scenes were graphic is an understatement. In fact, they were darn right hilariously gross. At number 2, Episode 7, Fresh Blood. In this episode, the Winchesters battle Gordon the Hunter again. But despite Gordon threatening Bella for Sam and Dean's whereabouts, or Buffy and Angel alum Mercedes McNabb making a guest appearance, as a vampire no less, or even Dean convincingly threatening Bella's life for messing with Sam's safety. Despite all of that, the most memorable part in this episode was when Gordon is kidnapped and turned into the very creature he hates, hunts, and kills, a vampire. To say these scenes were unexpected is an understatement. In fact, they were darn right astonishingly thrilling. And at my number 1 spot, my favorite episode of Season 3 of Supernatural, Episode 16, No Rest for the Wicked. In this episode, the Winchesters race against the clock to find Lilith and save Dean from going to hell. But despite Lilith torturing and sadistically toying around with an innocent family, or Dean getting his ass handed to him by a very pissed off Ruby, or even the Hellhounds unleashed on Dean and ripping him to shreds before my very eyes. Despite all of that, the most memorable part in this episode was when Sam shockingly wasn't affected by Lilith's attempt to kill him with her own powers. To say these scenes were chilling is an understatement. In fact, they were darn right mind-blowingly compelling. So, what do you think? Alright, there you have it, people. That is my ranking of all 16 episodes of the 3rd season of Supernatural. Let me know in the comments what would have been perhaps your top 5 picks or your top 3 picks. I have no doubt Mystery Spot is at the top for like 99% of you. No doubt at all. Maybe 100% of you. I could be the anomaly that has not put that episode that high up on my list. But either way, I'm really curious to know what episodes you really appreciate from this season. Season 3 was a really good season. If I had to kind of say where my ranking was in terms of the seasons thus far, and don't worry, I'm not going to make it a point to do that all the time, but I'm just saying because it just, the thought came to my head now. I would say really it's in the order in which it's been presented to me. I love season 1, I love season 2, and I love season 3, but not as much as season 2, not as much as season 1. Season 2, what I really take from season 2 that I hope to see more of, especially as we dive into season 4, but I don't know where things are going to go. I can only presume we might go there just because of the way things ended in season 3, and I'll get to that in a second. So what I loved about season 2 was the whole element of Azazel and being such a very compelling antagonist to the Winchesters, and creating somewhat of a destiny kind of thing for Sam, based on giving Sam demon blood. And so because episode 16 of this season ended off with Dean going to hell and being in hell, and we saw a glimpse of hell, I'm only crossing my fingers that then season 4 will dive into more about hell and more about demons, and perhaps they may introduce another type of Azazel-like character for me to be like, woo, I love to hate him or her. I mean, don't get me wrong, I know Lilith was the new baddie of this season, and likely she'll continue to be the big baddie, but I just figure, hey, if we're gonna dive into hell, why not explore other baddies from hell, right? We'll see. So, with that in mind, stay tuned for my reaction to episode 1 of the 4th season, which will be coming up very, very soon. So until that video is posted to my channel, thank you so much for watching and tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm Asha, tuning out, peacing out. Thanks for watching. Check out my other videos and subscribe. You know you wanna.